Chapter 1. The Dust of Time. The attic of Rose Cottage smelled of forgotten summers and brittle paper. Clara Henshaw, her auburn hair dusted with cobwebs, knelt beside a splintered trunk, her fingers tracing the warped lid. She'd come to St. Mary Mead to catalogue the estate of her late aunt, Margaret Henshaw, a woman whose life seemed as unremarkable as the village itself. But the trunk, tucked beneath a sagging beam, felt like a secret the house had been waiting to confess. "Old letters, maybe," Clara muttered, prying the lid open with a creak. Inside lay a jumble of relics. A chipped teacup, a faded shawl, and nestled beneath a bundle of yellowed recipes, a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked, the embossed initials J.M. barely legible. Clara's breath caught. Jane Marple. The name was a legend in St. Mary Mead, whispered in tea-rooms and churchyards. A spinster who saw through lies as easily as she knitted scarves. She opened the journal, and a faint whiff of lavender rose from the pages. The ink had faded, some entries reduced to ghostly smudges, but the first line was clear, written in Miss Marple's precise hand. The crime at Willow Manor was not what it seemed, and I fear I alone saw the truth. Clara's pulse quickened. Willow Manor, the grand estate on the village's edge, had been abandoned since the 1950s, its windows dark, its gardens choked with weeds. Rumours of a scandal, a death, perhaps a murder, had lingered, but no one spoke of it directly. She flipped through the pages, catching fragments. Locked room, the heiress's tears, a shadow in the garden. The final entry was incomplete, the paper torn, as if someone had ripped out the truth. "Who were you hiding this from?" Clara whispered, brushing her fingers over the jagged edge. The attic seemed to grow colder, the slanted light catching motes of dust that danced like secrets. Downstairs, the kettle whistled, jarring her back to the present. She tucked the journal under her arm and descended the creaky stairs, her mind racing. Clara was no detective, just a historian with a knack for old documents. But Miss Marple's words felt like a challenge. A crime unsolved, a truth buried in time. How could she walk away? At the kitchen table she spread the journal open, her tea growing cold. The entries were not a narrative, but a puzzle. Scattered observations laced with cryptic asides. One name appeared repeatedly. Eleanor Grayson, a young woman tied to Willow Manor. Another entry mentioned a key that unlocked nothing, and a third described a scream that no one heard. Clara's academic mind itched to connect the dots, but the journal's gaps were maddening. "Miss Marple," she said aloud, half expecting an answer. "What were you trying to say?" The village clock chimed 6, its echo rolling through the quiet streets. Clara glanced out the window, where the silhouette of Willow Manor loomed against the dusk. Tomorrow she'd visit the manor's ruins and the church archives. If anyone knew Eleanor Grayson's story, it would be the vicar, or the ghosts of St. Mary Mead. As she closed the journal, a loose page slipped free, fluttering to the floor. Clara picked it up, her eyes narrowing at a single underlined sentence. "The killer was closer than they knew, and the truth lies in the shadows." She shivered, not from the evening chill, but from the certainty that she'd just stepped into Miss Marple's unfinished case. The attic of Rose Cottage smelled of forgotten summers and brittle paper. Clara Henshaw, her auburn hair dusted with cobwebs, knelt beside a splintered trunk, her fingers tracing the warped lid. She'd come to St. Mary Mead to catalogue the estate of her late aunt, Margaret Henshaw, a woman whose life seemed as unremarkable as the village itself. But the trunk, tucked beneath a sagging beam, felt like a secret the house had been waiting to confess. "Old letters, maybe," Clara muttered, prying the lid open with a creak. Inside lay a jumble of relics, a chipped teacup, a faded shawl, and, nestled beneath a bundle of yellowed recipes, a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked, the embossed initials J.M. barely legible. Clara's breath caught. Jane Marple. The name was a legend in St. Mary Mead, whispered in tea-rooms and churchyards. A spinster who saw through lies as easily as she knitted scarves. She opened the journal, and a faint whiff of lavender rose from the pages. The ink had faded, some entries reduced to ghostly smudges, but the first line was clear, written in Miss Marple's precise hand. The crime at Willow Manor was not what it seemed, and I fear I alone saw the truth. Clara's pulse quickened. Willow Manor, the grand estate on the village's edge, had been abandoned since the 1950s, its windows dark, its gardens choked with weeds. Rumours of a scandal, a death, perhaps a murder, had lingered, but no one spoke of it directly. Je flipped through the pages, catching fragments. Locked room, the heiress's tears, a shadow in the garden. The final entry was incomplete, the paper torn, as if someone had ripped out the truth. "Who were you hiding this from?" Clara whispered, brushing her fingers over the jagged edge. The attic seemed to grow colder, the slanted light catching motes of dust that danced like secrets. Downstairs, the kettle whistled, jarring her back to the present. She tucked the journal under her arm and descended the creaky stairs, her mind racing. Clara was no detective, just a historian with a knack for old documents. But Miss Marple's words felt like a challenge. A crime unsolved, a truth buried in time. How could she walk away? At the kitchen table she spread the journal open, her tea growing cold. The entries were not a narrative, but a puzzle. Scattered observations laced with cryptic asides. One name appeared repeatedly. Eleanor Grayson, a young woman tied to Willow Manor. Another entry mentioned a key that unlocked nothing, and a third described a scream that no one heard. Clara's academic mind itched to connect the dots, but the journal's gaps were maddening. "Miss Marple," she said aloud, half expecting an answer. "What were you trying to say?" The village clock chimed 6, its echo rolling through the quiet streets. Clara glanced out the window, where the silhouette of Willow Manor loomed against the dusk. Tomorrow she'd visit the manor's ruins and the church archives. If anyone knew Eleanor Grayson's story, it would be the vicar, or the ghosts of St. Mary Mead. As she closed the journal, a loose page slipped free, fluttering to the floor. Clara picked it up, her eyes narrowing at a single underlined sentence. The killer was closer than they knew, and the truth lies in the shadows. She shivered, not from the evening chill, but from the certainty that she'd just stepped into Miss Marple's unfinished case. Chapter 2. Whispers in St. Mary Mead. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the edges of its stone cottages and winding lanes. Clara stepped out of Rose Cottage, Miss Marple's journal tucked safely in her satchel, its weight both a comfort and a challenge. The village was awake but hushed, as if it knew the secrets she was chasing. A milkman nodded as he rattled past, and two women in the tea-room window watched her with the sharp curiosity of those who'd lived here too long. Clara's destination was the church, where Reverend Thomas Hale, now in his 80s, might shed light on the journal's cryptic references to Willow Manor. But first she paused at the village green, finding a bench beneath an ancient yew. She opened the journal, hoping daylight might reveal what the attic's shadows had hidden. The pages were a labyrinth of Miss Marple's thoughts, written in bursts of insight rather than chronological order. One entry, dated June 1952, caught Clara's eye. Eleanor Grayson was no saint, but she deserved better than the lies that buried her. The manor's walls hold the truth, if only they could speak. Below it, a sketch of a key, its bow shaped like a clover, was annotated with a single word: useless. Clara frowned. A useless key? Was it literal or a metaphor? She flipped to another page where Miss Marple had written, "The vicar saw more than he admits, but fear seals his lips. I must tread carefully." The words sent a prickle down her spine. If the vicar was involved, even peripherally, her visit might stir old wounds. She closed the journal and headed toward St. Michael's Church, its spire piercing the mist. The graveyard beside it was a patchwork of mossy stones, some so worn they were illegible. Clara's eyes lingered on a cluster of graves near the manor's boundary wall, wondering if Eleanor Grayson rested among them. Inside, the church was cool and dim, smelling of wax and old hymnals. Reverend Hale was polishing the altar candlesticks, his hands trembling with age but precise. He looked up, his eyes sharp beneath white brows. "Miss Henshaw, isn't it?" His voice was soft, like pages turning. "Your aunt spoke of you often. A historian, yes?" Clara smiled, easing into the conversation. "I'm sorting through her things. I found something curious, a journal by Jane Marple. It mentions a death at Willow Manor. Eleanor Grayson, perhaps." The vicar's hand stilled, the cloth crumpling in his fist. For a moment he seemed to shrink, as if the name carried a weight he'd long tried to shed. "Eleanor," he said at last, "was a tragedy. A young woman full of promise, taken too soon. But that was decades ago. Why stir it now?" "The journal suggests it wasn't an accident," Clara said carefully, watching his face. Miss Marple thought there was more to it. "A crime, maybe." Hale's lips tightened. He set the candlestick down with a faint clink. Jane Marple saw mysteries everywhere. She was clever, but not infallible. The manor was a place of complications. The Grayson family had their troubles: money, pride, secrets. Eleanor's death was ruled a fall. A locked room, they said. No one could have entered. "A locked room," Clara echoed, her pulse quickening. The journal had mentioned that phrase. How does someone fall to their death in a locked room? The vicar hesitated, his gaze drifting to the stained-glass window above, where an angel's face glowed in the morning light. The police said she was distraught. The window was open. It was enough for them. He turned back to her, his expression guarded. "Miss Henshaw, Some stories are best left buried. The living have enough to bear. Clara sensed a door closing in his tone, but she pressed gently. Did you know Eleanor well? Or the others at the manor? The heiress, the doctor, the staff? I knew them all, he said curtly. The Graysons were generous to the church, but their home was no paradise. As for the others, people talk, Miss Henshaw. They always do. But talk isn't truth. He stepped away, signalling the conversation's end, but not before adding, if you must dig, check the manor's gatehouse. The gardener, old Tom Withers, kept records of who came and went. He saw things too. He's long gone, but his logs might still be there. Clara thanked him, her mind buzzing. The vicar's reluctance was telling, and his mention of Tom Withers felt like a breadcrumb Miss Marple herself might have left. As she left the church, the mist had lifted, revealing Willow Manor's silhouette in the distance, its chimneys stark against the sky. Back at the bench, she jotted notes. Eleanor's death. Fall or murder. Locked room. Vicar hiding something. Gardener's logs. She glanced at the journal, its pages fluttering in the breeze. One phrase stood out, written in a hurried scrawl. The truth is in the manor, but the danger is in asking. Clara's resolve hardened. She'd visit the manor's gatehouse next, hunting for Tom Withers' logs. But as she packed the journal away, a shadow moved at the edge of the green. A figure, too distant to identify, watching her before slipping behind a hedge. Her heart skipped. Was it just a villager, or had her questions already stirred something? Darker. Chapter 3. The Vicar's Secret. Clara couldn't shake the image of the shadowed figure on the village green. It lingered like a smudge on a photograph, blurring her focus as she sat in Rose Cottage's parlour that evening, the journal open before her. The vicar's words, his hesitation, his cryptic mention of Tom Withers gnawed at her. He knew more than he'd let on, and Miss Marple's note about his sealed lips suggested she'd thought so too. She turned to a new page in the journal, the ink so faint it seemed to whisper. The entry, dated July 1952, read, Reverend, Hale was at the manor that night, though he denies it. His sermon on forgiveness the next Sunday was no coincidence. I saw the guilt in his eyes. Clara's breath hitched. The vicar had been at Willow Manor the night Eleanor Grayson died. Why had he hidden that? Below the entry, Miss Marple had scribbled a single line. The locket holds the key, but not the one they think. Clara frowned, her fingers brushing the sketch of the clover-shaped key from the previous page. Was the locket literal? Like the key, or another of Miss Marple's metaphors? The journal was maddeningly elusive, each clue a thread that unravelled into more questions. Determined to press the vicar further, Clara resolved to return to the church the next morning. But first, she needed context. She rummaged through her aunt's bookshelves, pulling out a worn history of St. Mary Mead. The section on Willow Manor was brief but telling. The Grayson family, once the village's pride, fell into ruin after the tragic death of Eleanor Grayson in 1952. The manor was abandoned soon after, its secrets locked within. No mention of a locked room or murder, only the vague word tragic. The village had buried the story deep. At dawn, Clara found Reverend Hale in the church vestry, sorting hymnals. The room was cramped, its walls lined with faded photographs of Past congregations. He looked up, his expression a mix of weariness and wariness. "Back so soon, Miss Henshaw?" he said, his tone polite but edged. "I thought I'd answered your questions." Clara didn't waste time. "You were at Willow Manor the night Eleanor died, weren't you? Miss Marple wrote it in her journal. She said you carried guilt." The vicar froze, a hymnal slipping from his hands to the floor with a soft thud. His face paled, and for a moment Clara thought he might collapse. He sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "Jane Marple," he muttered. "Even now, she haunts me." "Tell me what happened," Clara said, softening her voice, but holding his gaze. "If it was a crime, the truth matters. For Eleanor." Hale's eyes darted to the vestry door, as if expecting someone to burst through. He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was there, yes, but not for the reason you think. The Graysons were in turmoil. Eleanor's brother, Philip, was squandering their fortune. There were arguments. I went to mediate, to offer counsel. I heard a scream, then silence. By the time I reached the upper floor, they'd found her, dead at the base of the tower stairs. The room was locked from the inside." Clara's mind raced. The locked room again. Who was there that night? Who found her? The family. Philip and his sister Lillian. The heiress. Dr. Carver, who lived nearby. The maid, Sarah, and Tom Withers, the gardener. They were all shaken. The police came, ruled it a fall. I wanted to believe them. His voice cracked. But Eleanor was wearing a locket that night, one she never took off. It was gone when they found her. Clara's pulse quickened, Miss Marple's words echoing. "The locket holds the key. Did you tell the police about the locket?" Hale shook his head. "I tried, but Philip insisted it was unimportant. He was forceful. The Graysons had influence. I was young, afraid of crossing them, so I stayed silent." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I've carried that shame for 70 years. If Jane suspected foul play, she never told me. But she watched us all, always watching." Clara felt a pang of sympathy but pressed on. "Where's the locket now? And why lie about being there?" "Don't know about the locket," he said, his voice breaking. "As for lying, I was protecting someone. Not myself, but someone who begged me to stay quiet. I can't say more. Please, let this go." "Who?" Clara asked, leaning closer. "Who were you protecting?" The vicar's lips parted, but a sharp knock at the vestry door cut him off. A woman's voice called, "Reverend, the choir's waiting." Hale stood abruptly, his face a mask of relief and fear. "We're done here," he said, ushering Clara out, but as she stepped into the nave, he grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Be careful, Miss Henshaw. Some secrets fight to stay buried." Outside, the churchyard was bathed in pale sunlight, but Clara felt a chill. The vicar's story confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions, but opened new mysteries. The missing locket, the locked room, and someone he was still protecting. She opened the journal, scanning for mentions of the locket. A later entry caught her eye. "Lillian Grayson clutched her own locket when I asked about Eleanor's. Her tears were real, but her words were not. Lillian, the heiress." Clara's next step was clear. She needed to find Lillian Grayson, if she was still alive. But as she crossed the churchyard, She noticed fresh footprints in the dew-soaked grass, leading from the vestry window to the manor's boundary wall. Someone had been listening. Chapter 4. The Locked Room. The gates of Willow Manor groaned as Clara pushed them open, their rusted hinges protesting after decades of neglect. The manor loomed ahead, a skeletal relic of grandeur, its stone facade choked with ivy, and its windows like empty eyes. The morning sun did little to warm the air, and Clara tightened her scarf, the journal a reassuring weight in her satchel. The vicar's words, a locked room, a scream, a missing locket, had driven her here, to the place where Eleanor Grayson's life ended. The manor's grounds were a tangle of brambles and overgrown roses, their thorns snagging at her coat as she followed a cracked path to the main entrance. The door was boarded shut, but a side gate, half hidden by a yew hedge, hung ajar. Clara slipped through, her boots crunching on gravel, and found herself in a courtyard that led to the manor's tower, the likely site of the locked room from the vicar's story. She paused to consult the journal, its pages fluttering in the breeze. An entry from August 1952 was stark. The tower room was locked from within, the key in Eleanor's pocket, yet the window was open and the locket was gone. No one asked why the key mattered more than the fall. Miss Marple's words were precise, almost accusatory, as if she'd seen through the official story from the start. Clara traced the sketch of the clover-shaped key, wondering if it was the same one found on Eleanor. The tower's entrance was a narrow door, its wood warped but intact. Clara pushed it open, revealing a spiral staircase that curled upward into shadow. The air inside was damp, heavy with the scent of mould and something sharper, perhaps the ghost of old grief. She climbed carefully, her flashlight beam dancing across stone walls etched with faint scratches, as if someone had clawed at them long ago. At the top, she found the room. It was small, circular, with a single window that gaped like a wound, its frame splintered. The door behind her was solid oak, its lock rusted but intact. Clara tested it, imagining it locked from the inside, the key in Eleanor's pocket as she fell. The floor was strewn with debris, shattered glass, a broken chair. But one detail caught her eye. A faint outline in the dust, rectangular, as if a small box or book had rested there for years before being removed. "How did you die here?" Clara whispered, her voice swallowed by the room's emptiness. She crossed to the window, peering down at the courtyard below. The drop was steep, easily fatal, but the logistics nagged at her. If Eleanor fell, or was pushed, how had the room remained locked? And where was the locket? She knelt to examine the floor, her fingers brushing the dust. Beneath a loose floorboard, she found something glinting. A tiny brass hinge, no bigger than a thumbnail, as if from a locket or a jewellery box. Her heart raced. Was this a fragment of Eleanor's missing locket? She pocketed it, her mind buzzing, with Miss Marple's cryptic note. "The locket holds the key, but not the one they think." As she stood, a creak echoed from the staircase below. Clara froze, her flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. "Hello?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. No answer, but the air seemed to shift, as if the manor itself were holding its breath. She crept to the door, peering down, the spiral stairs. Nothing but shadows. Yet the creak came again, closer now. Clara's grip tightened on her satchel. She descended quickly, her boots echoing in the confined space. At the bottom, she scanned the courtyard, half expecting to see the shadowy figure from the village green. The gate still hung ajar, but a fresh scuff mark marred the gravel, too large for her own footprints. Someone had been here, watching. Back in the open air, Clara's nerves steadied, but her resolve hardened. The hinge was a clue, however small, and the locked room was no longer just a story. It was a puzzle with physical evidence. She opened the journal again, searching for more about the tower. A later entry, barely legible, stopped her cold. The room was a lie. The key was a distraction. Eleanor knew too much, and someone made sure she never spoke. Clara's eyes flicked to the manor's upper windows, where a curtain seemed to twitch. Or was it the wind? She needed to find Tom Wither's logs at the gatehouse, as the vicar had suggested, and track down Lillian Grayson. But the scuff mark and the creak in the tower warned her. She wasn't alone in this investigation. Someone else wanted the truth, or wanted it silenced. As she left the manor, the journal's final words from that page burned in her mind. The killer walked among them, unseen because no one looked twice. Chapter 5. Shadows of Suspects. Clara sat at Rose Cottage's kitchen table, the brass hinge from the tower room glinting under the lamplight. It was a small thing, easily overlooked, yet it felt like a whisper from Eleanor Grayson herself. The journal lay open beside it, its pages a map of half-truths and hidden motives. Clara's encounter at Willow Manor, the creak in the tower, the scuff mark, had left her wary. But the vicar's mention of the manor's key players drove her forward. She needed to know who they were and what they'd hidden. She turned to a journal entry dated September 1952, Miss Marple's handwriting sharp despite the faded ink. 4 shadows linger around Eleanor's death. Lillian, who inherited all. Dr. Carver, whose hands healed but perhaps harmed. Sarah, the maid, whose loyalty wavered. And Tom Withers, whose eyes saw too much. Each carries a piece of the truth, but none will speak it. Clara jotted down the names, her pen scratching in the quiet. Lillian Grayson, Dr. Carver, Sarah, Tom Withers, each a suspect, each a puzzle piece. To flesh them out, Clara dug through her aunt's collection of village records, a chaotic pile of ledgers and clippings stuffed in a tin box. A 1951 parish newsletter mentioned Lillian Grayson, the eldest Grayson sibling, who inherited Willow Manor after Eleanor's death and her brother Philip's ruin. Miss Lillian, poised and generous, donated to the church restoration. The article gushed, but a handwritten note in the margin, her aunt's perhaps, added, "Too perfect, hides something." Clara's brow furrowed. Was Lillian's grief for Eleanor genuine, or a performance? Dr. Carver appeared in a faded medical directory. Dr. Henry Carver, general practitioner, served St. Mary Mead, 1945–1960, resided near Willow Manor. A clipping from 1953 noted his retirement to a nearby town, hinting at a sudden departure after Eleanor's death. Why leave so soon? Clara wondered. Miss Marple's note about his hands, healed but perhaps harmed, suggested a darker role. Had he misdiagnosed Eleanor's death to protect someone? Sarah, the maid, was harder to trace. A church ledger listed a Sarah Ellis, employed at Willow Manor in 1952, who left the village shortly after the manor closed. No forwarding address, no family noted. Clara recalled the vicar's mention of Sarah being shaken that night. Was she a witness or complicit? Tom Withers, the gardener, had a brief obituary from 1955. Thomas Withers, 62, passed quietly, known for his roses at Willow Manor and meticulous gatehouse logs. The vicar had pointed her to those logs, but Miss Marple's words, eyes, saw too much, implied Tom had witnessed something critical. His death, just 3 years after Eleanor's, felt too convenient. Clara leaned back, her tea long cold. 4 suspects, each with motive. Lillian for inheritance, Carver for a possible cover-up, Sarah for divided loyalty, Tom for knowing too much. But the journal suggested Eleanor's death was no simple fall, and the missing locket and useless key loomed large. She needed to visit the gatehouse for Tom's logs and track down Lillian, who might still be alive. As she closed the journal, a new entry caught her eye, tucked between 2 stuck pages. Eleanor argued with Lillian the night she died. Voices rose, then fell silent. The locket was her shield, but it betrayed her. Clara's pulse quickened. An argument, and the locket again, tied to betrayal. She scribbled a note. Find Lillian. Check gatehouse logs for that night's visitors. A sudden tap at the window made her jump. The night beyond was black, the glass reflecting her own wide eyes. She crossed to the window, peering out, but saw only the garden's swaying shadows. A branch, perhaps, caught in the wind. Yet as she locked the cottage door, her eyes caught a faint gleam on the path outside. A single cigarette butt, its tip still warm, as if someone had stood there moments ago. Clara's throat tightened. The figure on the green, the scuff mark at the manor. And now this. Someone was watching her, and they weren't subtle anymore. She clutched the journal, Miss Marple's words echoing. The killer walked among them, unseen, because no one looked twice. Tomorrow she'd head to the gatehouse, but tonight she'd sleep with the light on. Chapter 6. The Missing Page. The morning was grey, the sky over St. Mary Mead heavy with the promise of rain. Clara stood at the edge of Willow Manor's grounds, the gatehouse before her, a squat stone building half swallowed by ivy. The cigarette butt from last night still haunted her, its warm tip a silent warning. She clutched Miss Marple's journal, its leather cover worn smooth, and steeled herself. The gatehouse held Tom Withers' logs, and if the vicar was right, they might reveal who was at the manor the night Eleanor Grayson died. Before leaving Rose Cottage, Clara had pored over the journal, her fingers pausing at a jagged tear where a page had been ripped out. The surrounding entries, dated October 1952, were tantalizingly vague. One read, "The truth was written, but someone feared it. The page is gone, but the manor remembers." Miss Marple's tone was sharp, almost defiant, as if she knew the theft was no accident. The next intact page mentioned Tom Withers. His logs note every visitor, but one name was scratched out. Why hide a guest? Clara's pulse quickened. The missing page and the scratched-out name felt like pieces of the same puzzle. The gatehouse. Door was unlocked, its hinges squealing as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust. the room cluttered with mildewed crates and a rickety desk. A single window, cracked but intact, cast dim light on shelves stuffed with ledgers. Clara's heart sank at the chaos, but she began searching, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The ledgers were Tom Wither's work, each page filled with meticulous notes. June 3rd, 1952. Dr. Carver, 2 p.m., medical call. June 10th, Lillian Grayson, 9 a.m., returned from London. Clara flipped to July 1952, the month of Eleanor's death. The entry for July 12th stopped her cold. 9 p.m., visitor to manor, name obscured, ink smudged, left at 11 p.m. Below it in Tom's tight script, heard voices near tower. Miss Eleanor and another, not my place to ask. The smudged name was illegible, the ink deliberately blotted. Someone had covered their tracks. Clara pocketed the ledger, her mind racing. The journal's missing page might have named that visitor. She rummaged further, hoping for more, when her fingers brushed a small tin box wedged behind a shelf. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not torn, but folded tightly, its edges brittle. It wasn't the missing page, but Miss Marple's handwriting was unmistakable. The locket was no trinket. It held a secret worth killing for. Tom saw it, and I fear he paid the price. Clara's breath caught. Tom Wither's death in 1955, quiet, unremarkable, now seemed sinister. Had he been silenced? The locket, the key, the scratched-out name, all pointed to a truth someone had buried deep. She tucked the note into the journal, her hands trembling. The gatehouse felt smaller now, its shadows heavier. A soft thud outside snapped her attention to the window. Through the cracked glass, she saw nothing but the manor's overgrown grounds. Yet the hairs on her neck rose, as if the air itself were watching. She stepped outside, scanning the path. A fresh footprint marred the mud, its tread distinct from her own, deep, deliberate, leading toward the manor's ruins. "Who's there?" she called, her voice sharp in the stillness. No answer, but a faint rustle came from the brambles, like a whisper retreating. Clara's grip tightened on her satchel. The figure on the green, the scuff mark in the tower, the cigarette butt, and now this footprint. Someone was tracking her every move. Was it one of the suspects, still alive, and guarding their secret? Or someone else, stirred by her digging? She hurried back to the village, the ledger and note burning in her satchel. At Rose Cottage, she spread her findings on the table, the journal open to the torn page's stub. The missing page was key, but the gatehouse had given her enough to pursue Lillian Grayson next. A quick call to the village postmistress revealed Lillian was alive, living in a nursing home 30 miles away. Clara would visit her tomorrow, armed with questions about the locket and the argument with Eleanor. As she locked the cottage for the night, a flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow passing under the street lamp across the lane. It was gone before she could focus, but the chill it left lingered. She opened the journal one last time, her eyes falling on Miss Marple's final words from the gatehouse note. "The manor keeps its secrets, but it whispers to those who listen. Beware, the one who hears you back." Clara shivered, not from the cold, but from the certainty that the manor's whispers were growing louder. And someone was listening too closely. Chapter 7. The Heiress's Confession. The nursing home in Upper Cranley smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers, a stark contrast to St. Mary Mead's earthy charm. Clara sat in a sterile waiting room, Miss Marple's journal tucked in her bag beside Tom Wither's ledger and the brass hinge from the tower. The postmistress had confirmed Lillian Grayson, now 92, lived here, her mind sharp despite her frail body. Clara's questions burned. What did Lillian know about Eleanor's locket, the argument, and the scratched-out name in the gatehouse log? A nurse led her to a sunlit conservatory, where Lillian sat in a wicker chair, a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, and her eyes, though clouded with age, gleamed with a keenness that made Clara pause. A gold locket hung at her throat, its surface etched with a faint clover pattern, eerily similar to the journal's sketch of the useless key. Miss Grayson, Clara began, settling across from her. I'm Clara Henshaw, researching St. Mary Mead's history. I found Jane Marple's journal, and it mentions you and Eleanor. Lillian's fingers tightened on her locket, her lips curving into a faint, bitter smile. Jane Marple, she murmured. That old crow saw everything, didn't she? Always knitting, always judging. What does her journal say about me? Clara chose her words carefully. It says you argued with Eleanor the night she died, that your tears were real, but your words weren't. And it mentions a locket, hers, not yours. Lillian's smile faded, her gaze drifting to the window where rain streaked the glass. Eleanor was my sister, she said softly, my younger sister. Everyone loved her, her laugh, her fire. But she was reckless, always digging into things that weren't her business. That night, yes, we argued. She'd found something, a letter, in Father's study. She wouldn't tell me what it said, only that it changed everything. A letter? Clara leaned forward, her pulse quickening. The journal hadn't mentioned a letter. What was it about? Lillian's eyes snapped back to her, sharp and guarded. I never read it. She burned it before I could, but it made her angry enough to confront someone. She went to the tower room, locked the door, and we found her below, broken. Her voice cracked, and for a moment Clara saw genuine grief, but Lillian's next words were colder. The locket was hers, yes, a gift from Mother. It was empty when I last saw it, but Eleanor said it held her heart. Poetic nonsense. Clara's mind raced. Miss Marple's note, the locket held a secret worth killing for, contradicted Lillian's dismissal. The locket was missing when they found her, she said, and Jane Marple thought someone took it. Did you see it that night? Lillian's hand drifted to her own locket, her fingers tracing the clover. This was mine, she said, almost to herself. Eleanor's was like it, but smaller. I don't know where hers went. Perhaps it fell with her. Her tone was too casual, and Clara caught a flicker of unease in her eyes, as if she'd said, more than intended. Miss Marple wrote that you clutched your locket when asked about Eleanor's. Clara pressed. Why? And who was at the manor that night? The gatehouse log mentions a visitor, but the name was smudged. Lillian's face hardened, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're asking dangerous questions, Miss Henshaw. The manor was full of shadows that night. Philip, drunk and useless. Dr. Carver, always hovering. Sarah, skittish as a mouse. Tom Withers lurking in the gardens. And yes, someone else came, late. I didn't see who. But Eleanor knew them. She let them in. She paused, her eyes boring into Clara's. I lied to protect her memory, not to hide a crime. Eleanor fell. That's the truth. Clara didn't believe her. The journal's missing page, the smudged log, the locket's secret, all pointed to more. If it was just a fall, why tear a page from Jane Marple's journal? Why hide the visitor's name? Lillian's hand froze on her locket, her breath hitching. "You've found too much," she said, her voice barely audible. "I tore nothing." But if a page is gone, someone else feared Jane's pen. Leave this alone, or you'll end up like Tom Withers, quietly gone. The threat hung in the air, chilling Clara despite the conservatory's warmth. She stood, her questions unanswered, but her suspicions sharpened. Lillian knew more about the locket and the letter, and her warning about Tom echoed Miss Marple's fears. As Clara thanked her and turned to leave, Lillian's voice stopped her. "Miss Henshaw," she called, her tone softer but no less urgent. "If you find Eleanor's locket, don't open it. Some secrets are better locked away." Outside the rain had stopped, but the air felt heavier. Clara glanced back at the nursing home, catching Lillian's silhouette in the window, her hand still on her locket. The drive back to St. Mary Mead was quiet, her mind churning. The letter Eleanor burned, the visitor she let in, the locket's secret. Lillian's confession was no confession at all, only a maze of half-truths. At Rose Cottage, Clara opened the journal, hoping for clarity. A faint pencil mark on the torn page's stub caught her eye, barely visible. "Lillian's locket lies." Miss Marple's hand, subtle but damning. Clara's gaze fell to the brass hinge in her pocket. Was it from Eleanor's locket, or Lillian's? As she locked the door, a faint creak came from the garden, too deliberate for the wind. She peered through the curtains, her heart pounding. A single rose, freshly cut, lay on the doorstep, its petals stark against the stone. Someone had been here, and they wanted her to know it. Chapter 8. The Doctor's Deception. Clara drove through the winding roads of St. Mary Mead, the brass hinge and Tom Withers' ledger rattling in her satchel. Lillian's cryptic words, "Some secrets are better locked away," echoed in her mind, but the journal's accusation against Dr. Carver, whose hands healed but perhaps harmed, drove her to the neighbouring town of Lower Cranley, where Dr. Henry Carver had retired in 1953. The rose on her doorstep last night, its petals too fresh for coincidence, had left her sleepless, certain someone was watching her every move. The Lower Cranley Library, a squat brick building, held medical archives from the 1950s, and Clara hoped to find Dr. Carver's records on Eleanor Grayson's death. The librarian, a wiry woman with a penchant for gossip, pointed her to a dusty filing cabinet. "Carver was a good doctor," she said, "but he left in a hurry after that business at Willow Manor. Never came back." Clara's fingers sifted through brittle files until she found it. A coroner's report on Eleanor Grayson, signed by Dr. Carver. It was brief, clinical. Death by misadventure. Fall from tower window. July 12, 1952. No signs of trauma beyond impact. But a handwritten note in the margin, in Carver's tight script, caught her eye. Bruising on wrists inconsistent with fall, not reported per family request. Clara's breath caught. Bruising? Why hadn't he reported it? The journal's warning about Carver's hands felt heavier now. She dug deeper, finding a medical log from the manor, also in Carver's hand. It listed Eleanor's visits in the weeks before her death. June 20th. Miss Grayson. Complaints of headaches, prescribed rest. June 28th. Anxiety, possible laudanum overdose. Monitored. Laudanum. Clara frowned. The addictive opiate was common then, but an overdose suggested more than nerves. Had Eleanor been unstable, or was someone, Carver, keeping her sedated? Miss Marple's journal offered another piece. An entry from November 1952 read, Dr. Carver swore Eleanor was alone in the tower, but his watch was slow that night. He arrived later than he claimed, and his bag held more than bandages. Clara's pulse quickened. A slow watch? A suspicious bag? She needed to speak to Carver himself. The librarian mentioned Carver, now in his late 90s, lived in a cottage on the town's edge. Clara found it, a tidy home with rose beds, eerily like the one left on her doorstep. She knocked, and a frail man answered, his eyes sharp despite his stooped frame. "You're Margaret Henshaw's niece," he said, unprompted. "I heard you were digging into old ghosts." Clara's skin prickled. How did he know? "I'm here about Eleanor Grayson," she said, stepping inside. The parlour was cluttered with medical books and faded photos, one showing a younger Carver with the Graysons at Willow Manor. "Your coroner's report left out bruising on her wrists, and your medical log mentions laudanum. Was she drugged?" Carver's face tightened, but he gestured to a chair. "Eleanor was troubled," he said, his voice steady but rehearsed. "The laudanum was her own doing. She took too much, got confused. The bruising, likely from her fall. I didn't report it because the Graysons begged me not to. They wanted no scandal." Clara leaned forward, her voice firm. "Jane Marple thought you lied about when you arrived. And what was in your bag that night?" Carver's eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger breaking his calm. Jane Marple saw conspiracies in every shadow. I arrived at 10, as I said. My bag had medical supplies, nothing more. Eleanor was dead when I got there, the room locked, the key in her pocket. A tragedy, not a crime. "Then why leave St. Mary Mead so suddenly?" Clara pressed. "And why did you note the bruising, but not report it?" He stood, his hands trembling. "You're chasing ghosts, girl. The Graysons paid me to keep things quiet, yes, but only to protect Eleanor's name. She was unwell. I did my duty." He moved to the door, his tone final. "Leave it be. Some truths hurt more than they heal." Clara stood unconvinced. His answers were too polished, his departure too convenient. As she left, her eyes caught a small box on his mantel, a clover-shaped clasp like the Lockett's sketch. "Is that Eleanor's?" she asked, pointing. Carver's face paled. "A keepsake," he muttered, "from a patient, not hers." But his voice shook, and he shut the door quickly. Back at Rose Cottage, Clara spread her findings. The coroner's note, the laudanum log, the journal's accusation. Carver's story didn't add up. Bruising, a slow watch, a suspicious bag, and now a clover clasp. Had he drugged Eleanor, covered up a murder, or taken the locket? She opened the journal, finding a new entry. Carver's loyalty was bought, but not by money. His heart betrayed him. A romantic motive? Clara's mind spun. As she locked the cottage, a faint scent hit her, roses sharp and fresh. On the doorstep lay another bloom. Its stem snapped. a note tucked beneath. "Stop digging or you'll fall like her." Clara's heart pounded. Carver, Lillian, someone else. The locket, the laudanum, the bruising, it was all connected, and someone wanted her silenced. Chapter 9. The Maid's Memory. Clara's hands trembled as she tucked the threatening note, "Stop digging or you'll fall like her," into her satchel alongside the journal, Tom Wither's ledger, and the brass hinge. The rose it came with, now wilting, sat on Rose Cottage's table, a grim reminder of the eyes following her. Dr. Carver's evasive answers and the clover-shaped clasp had deepened her suspicions, but Miss Marple's journal pointed to another witness, Sarah Ellis, the maid, whose loyalty wavered. Clara needed her story. Tracking Sarah took hours of digging through village records, and a lucky call to a retired postman who remembered her. Sarah, now in her late 80s, lived in a small flat in Danbury, a coastal town an hour from St. Mary. Mead. Clara drove through a drizzle, the journal open on the passenger seat to a December 1952 entry. Sarah saw the locket in Eleanor's hand before the scream. She wept when I asked, but her silence spoke louder than words. Clara's grip tightened on the wheel. What had Sarah seen? And why stay silent? The flat was in a weathered building overlooking the grey sea, its corridors smelling of salt and faded lavender. Sarah answered the door, her face lined but her eyes bright with a mix of fear and recognition. Her grey hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her hands fidgeted with a worn apron, as if she still served at Willow Manor. "You're here about Eleanor," Sarah said before Clara could speak, her voice soft but heavy. "I knew someone would come after all these years. Come in." The living room was sparse, cluttered with faded photographs and a single rose in a vase, its petals too fresh, like the ones left for Clara. Her stomach twisted, but she focused on Sarah, who sat across from her, hands clasped tightly. "You've found Jane Marple's journal," Clara began, setting it on the table. "It says you saw Eleanor's locket the night she died. What happened?" Sarah's eyes glistened, her gaze drifting to a photo of a younger self in a maid's uniform, standing beside Eleanor at the manor. "Eleanor was kind," she said, her voice breaking. "Not like Miss Lillian or Master Philip. She'd talk to me, share her dreams. That night she was upset, pacing, clutching her locket. It was gold, with a clover clasp, like her mother's. She said it held her future." Clara leaned forward, her pulse quickening. Her future. Did she open it? Was there something inside? Naya nodded, a tear spilling down her cheek. A paper. Tiny, folded tight. She wouldn't show me, but she said it was proof. Proof of a lie. She was going to confront someone. I heard her arguing in the tower, voices low but angry. Then a scream and silence. Her hands shook. I ran up, but the door was locked. When we broke it down, she was gone. Below, by the window. Who's was she arguing with? Clara asked, her voice gentle but firm. The gatehouse log mentions a visitor that night, but the name was smudged. Sarah's eyes darted to the window, as if expecting someone outside. "I didn't see them," she whispered, "but I heard a man's voice, not Master Philip or Dr. Carver. Someone else, someone she trusted. I told Miss Marple, but she said to keep quiet for my safety. I left the village soon after. I was scared." Clara's mind raced. A man, not Philip or Carver. The journal's missing page might have named him. Why were you scared, Sarah? And what happened to the locket? Sarah's voice dropped to a near whisper. The locket was gone when we found her. I saw Dr. Carver searching the grass later, like he knew it was important. And Miss Lillian, she wore her own locket that night, but it was different. Heavier, like she'd swapped it. I told no one but Miss Marple. Then Tom Withers died, and I thought, maybe I'd be next. Clara's breath caught. Lillian's locket, heavier. The journal's note, Lillian's locket lies, flashed in her mind. Had Lillian taken Eleanor's locket, hiding its secret? And Sarah's fear of ending up like Tom suggested a killer still at work. Did you ever see the letter Eleanor burned, the one she argued with Lillian about? Sarah shook her head, her hands twisting the apron. No, but it was from their father's desk. Eleanor said it would ruin someone. I think that's why she died. She paused, her voice barely audible. Miss Henshaw, you're in danger. I've seen roses left at my door too these past weeks. Someone knows you're asking. Clara's skin prickled, the rose in the vase now a glaring threat. Who, Sarah? Who's doing this? I don't know, Sarah said, her eyes wide, but they're close. They always were. She reached for Clara's hand, her grip cold. Find the locket, but don't trust anyone, not even the ones you think are gone. The drive back to St. Mary Mead was tense. Clara's mind swirling with Sarah's words. A man's voice, a swapped locket, a letter that ruined someone. At Rose Cottage, she opened the journal, finding a new entry, faint but chilling. Sarah's fear was real. The locket's secret is the key, but the man in the tower holds the lock. The man in the tower, who was he? As she locked the door, a faint scrape came from the garden. Peering out, she saw nothing but darkness, until her flashlight caught a glint on the path, a clover-shaped clasp, identical to the one in Carver's cottage, lying beside another fresh rose. Clara's heart pounded. The locket's secret was closer than ever, but so was the one leaving roses, and they were done hiding. Chapter 10. The Gardener's Grave. The wind howled through St. Mary Mead's churchyard, stirring the yews and casting shadows that danced across the gravestones. Clara stood before an unmarked plot near the manor's boundary wall, her flashlight beam cutting through the dusk. The clover-shaped clasp and rose left on her doorstep last night burned in her memory, a warning that someone or something was closing in. Sarah's tearful account of the locket and the man in the tower had pointed Clara back to Tom Withers, the gardener whose eyes saw too much, according to Miss Marple. His obituary mentioned a quiet death in 1955, but the journal's hint that he paid the price suggested otherwise. Clara had returned to the church archives that morning, finding a faded burial record. Thomas Withers, interred July 1955. No marker, per his request. The vicar, Reverend Hale, had scribbled a note. Tom wished to rest near the manor, where his roses grew. Clara's instincts screamed that Tom's grave held answers, perhaps tied to the smudged name in his gatehouse log, or the locket's secret. She knelt by the plot, the earth soft and overgrown with weeds. The journal, tucked in her satchel, had a new entry she'd found last night, dated January 1953. Tom Withers left a message, not in his logs but in the earth. He feared the locket's truth would follow him to the grave. Clara's fingers brushed the soil, searching for anything. A stone, a marker, a clue. The wind carried a faint scent of roses, unnatural in the autumn chill, and her skin prickled. Was it her imagination, or did the air feel heavier here? Her flashlight caught a glint beneath the weeds, a flat stone, half buried, etched with crude letters. T.W. Saw, lock hidden. Clara's breath caught. Tom had left a message, just as Miss Marple wrote. Lock hidden could mean the locket or perhaps the locked tower room. But Saw was chilling. Tom had witnessed something, and this stone was his final testimony. She traced the letters, her heart pounding. Had he carved this before his death, knowing it might outlive him? She dug carefully around the stone, hoping for more. Beneath it, wrapped in rotted cloth, was a small metal box, rusted but intact. Inside lay a folded note, its paper brittle but legible, in Tom's tight script. July 12th, 1952. Saw Miss Eleanor with a man in the tower. Not the doctor or Master Philip. He carried a knife. Locket fell when she screamed. I took it, hid it in the rosebed. Forgive me. Clara's hands shook. Tom had taken the locket. And a man with a knife, not Carvus or Philip, matched Sarah's. Story of a male voice. The rosebed. Clara's mind flashed to the manor's overgrown gardens, where Tom's prized roses once grew. If the locket was there, it could hold the paper Sarah mentioned. Proof of a lie worth killing for. But Tom's note raised a darker question. If he hid the locket, why was he dead 3 years later? Had someone found out? A twig snapped behind her, sharp in the quiet. Clara spun, her flashlight sweeping the churchyard. The yews swayed, but no figure emerged. Yet the rose scent grew stronger, cloying, and a faint hum seemed to rise from the grave, like a whisper, too low to catch. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. No answer, but a shadow flickered at the manor's boundary wall, gone when she blinked. Clara pocketed the note and box, her nerves frayed. The journal's warning, "Beware the one who hears you back," felt alive in the darkening churchyard. She hurried back to Rose Cottage, locking the door behind her. Spreading her findings on the table, she added Tom's note to the pile. The brass hinge, the ledger, the threatening note, the clover clasp. The locket was in the rosebed, and she'd search for it tomorrow. But the man with the knife, who was he, and why was Tom silenced? She opened the journal, seeking Miss Marple's guidance. A faint entry, nearly erased, stopped her cold. Tom's grave is his confession, but the roses guard the truth. The man in the tower is not what he seems. Clara's eyes widened. Not what he seems. Was the man a disguise, a lie, or something else? The hum from the grave lingered in her ears, unnatural, like the manor itself was speaking. As she doused the lights, a soft thud hit the doorstep. Her heart sank. Another rose lay outside, its petals blood-red, a new note tucked beneath. The grave won't save you. Stop, or join him. Clara's breath hitched. The locket was close, but so was the killer, and they were no longer just watching. Chapter 11. The journal's cipher. Clara's hands shook as she locked Rose Cottage's door. The blood-red rose and its note. The grave won't save you. Stop, or join him. Still vivid in her mind. the clover-shaped clasp, Tom Wither's confession, and the journal's cryptic warnings crowded her thoughts. But one phrase from Miss Marple's last entry haunted her. "The man in the tower is not what he seems." She spread her findings on the kitchen table. The brass hinge, the ledger, the threatening notes, Tom's note from the grave, and opened the journal, determined to find the locket's secret before the roses became her epitaph. In the flickering lamplight, Clara noticed something new. Faint pencil marks in the journal's margins, barely visible, forming a pattern of numbers and letters. They weren't random. Miss Marple was too precise for that. The marks appeared on pages mentioning the locket, the tower, and the mysterious man, as if guiding her to a hidden truth. Clara grabbed a notepad, transcribing the code: 3L7R12T4K on one page, 9S2M15L on another. Her historian's mind recognized a cipher, perhaps a book code tied to the journal itself. She tested the first string, 3L7R12T4K. If it referred to the journal's pages, lines, and words, she needed a key. The third letter of the seventh word on page 12, line 4, was H. Methodically, she decoded the rest, her heart racing as letters formed words. HIDDENIDENTITY. Hidden identity? Clara's breath caught. She tackled the second string, 9S2M15L, which yielded SHEWASNOTELEANOR. Her pulse pounded. The victim wasn't Eleanor Grayson. Clara flipped to a January 1953 entry, where the cipher began. The locket's secret is not what it holds, but who it names. The truth lies in the margins for those who see. Miss Marple had known the victim's identity was a lie. Clara scanned earlier entries, finding one from July 1952. Eleanor's face was wrong that night, her manner too bold. The locket named another, but the manner silenced her. The locket's paper, Sarah's proof of a lie, must have revealed the woman in the tower wasn't Eleanor Grayson, but someone else, killed to protect that secret. Who was she? Clara's mind spun. Lillian had called Eleanor her sister, but her guarded words hinted at deception. Sarah saw Eleanor, with the locket, arguing with a man. Tom witnessed a knife and took the locket to the rosebed. Dr. Carver noted bruising and laudanum, perhaps to obscure the truth. The real Eleanor, where was she? Was she alive, hidden, or already dead? Clara needed the locket from the rosebed to confirm the cipher's claim. She planned to search Willow Manor's gardens at dawn, but the cipher's revelation reframed everything. If the victim wasn't Eleanor, the motives, Lillian's inheritance, Carver's cover-up, Sarah's fear, Tom's silence, shifted. The man with the knife, not what he seems, might hold the key to the impostor's identity. A soft knock at the window broke her focus. Clara froze, her flashlight sweeping the glass. Nothing but darkness, yet the rose scent seeped through, the cracks cloying and unnatural. She clutched the journal, Miss Marple's words echoing. The manner whispers to those who listen. The knock came again, deliberate, followed by a low scrape, like nails on wood. Her heart thudded. The roses, the clasps, the notes. Someone knew she was close. She crept to the door, peering through the curtain. A shadow moved across the garden, too swift to identify, leaving a fresh rose on the path, its petals glistening with dew. Good. Beneath was a scrap of paper, not a note, but a torn photograph. Half of a woman's face, her eyes wide with fear, a clover locket at her throat. Clara's blood ran cold. Was this the real Eleanor, or the impostor? Back at the table she examined the photo, its edges jagged, as if ripped from the journal's missing page. The cipher's words, "She was not Eleanor," burned in her mind. She needed the locket, but the Manor's rosebed felt like a trap. The journal's final margin mark, a single letter, R, seemed to point to the roses, or to revenge. As Clara doused the lamp, a faint hum filled the cottage, like the one at Tom's grave, low and mournful. She shivered, locking the windows, but the hum grew, whispering a name she couldn't catch. The locket was out there, and so was the killer, closer than ever, their roses marking her every step. Chapter 12. The Manor's last secret dawn broke over St. Mary Mead, its light weak and grey, as if reluctant to touch Willow Manor's ruins. Clara stood at the edge of the overgrown rosebed, her satchel heavy with the journal, Tom Wither's note, the brass hinge, the clover clasp, and the torn photograph of a woman's fearful face. The cipher's revelation, she was not Eleanor, pulsed in her mind, reshaping every clue. Lillian's lies, Carver's cover-up, Sarah's fear, Tom's grave. The locket, hidden here by Tom after Eleanor's scream, held the truth. But the roses on her doorstep, their notes threatening her life, warned that the killer was steps behind. The rosebed was a tangle of thorns and faded blooms. Tom's once proud garden, now a graveyard of petals. Clara knelt, her hands sifting. Through damp earth, guided by his note, I took it, hid it in the rosebed. The air was thick with the scent of roses, unnatural and cloying, like the hum at Tom's grave. Her fingers brushed something hard, a small metal box, rusted but intact, buried beneath a gnarled root. She pried it open, her heart pounding, and there it was, a gold locket, its clover clasp matching the sketch in the journal, its surface scratched but unbroken. Clara opened it, her breath shallow. Inside was a folded paper, yellowed but legible, its ink faint. I am not Eleanor Grayson. I am Clara Dane, hired to play her part. The letter proves Philip's fraud. If I die, he did it. Clara's blood ran cold. Clara Dane, an impostor posing as Eleanor. The journal's cipher was true. The woman in the tower wasn't Eleanor. The real Eleanor, where was she? And Philip, her brother, named as the killer? She scanned the rosebed, the manor's empty windows staring down. The letter Clara Dane mentioned, burned before Lillian could read it, must have exposed Philip's scheme. Perhaps a financial fraud, given the Graysons' ruin. Tom saw Clara Dane with a man wielding a knife, not Philip or Carver. Sarah heard a man's voice. The journal called him not what he seems. Clara's mind raced. Was the man Philip in disguise, or someone else tied to the fraud? A twig snapped behind her, sharp in the morning stillness. Clara spun, clutching the locket, her flashlight sweeping the brambles. Who's there? She called, her voice steady despite her fear. No answer, but the rose scent surged, and a shadow moved near the manor's gate, too deliberate to be the wind. She pocketed the locket and note, her pulse hammering. The roses, the clasps, the photograph. Someone had followed her here, and they wanted the locket's secret silenced. She hurried toward the gate, intending to return to Rose Cottage and confront Lillian with the locket's truth. But a figure stepped from the shadows, blocking her path. A man, his face obscured by a scarf, his eyes glinting with menace. In his hand was a knife, its blade catching the dawn's light. "Give me the locket," he rasped, his voice low, unfamiliar, yet chillingly precise. Clara's heart seized, Tom's note flashing in her mind, a man with a knife. "Who are you?" she demanded, backing toward the rosebed. "Philip's dead. Who sent you?" The man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Philip was a fool, but he's not the only one who wanted her gone. The locket names the wrong man. Hand it over, or you'll end up like Clara Dane. Clara's mind raced. The wrong man? The note blamed Philip, but the journal's cipher and the man's words suggested another mastermind. She gripped her satchel. The journal's weight a reminder of Miss Marple's wisdom. The manner whispers to those who listen. She needed to stall, to think. "The locket's empty," she lied, her voice firm. "I found nothing." The man stepped closer, his knife glinting. "You're a poor liar, Miss Henshaw. Like Tom, like Sarah, you saw too much. Give it to me, or I'll take it from you." A low hum rose from the rosebed, like the one at Tom's grave, mournful and urgent. Clara's skin prickled. Was it the manner, or her fear? She glanced at the ground, spotting a loose stone. As the man lunged, she grabbed it, swinging hard, at his hand. The knife flew into the thorns, and he cursed, stumbling. Clara ran, her boots pounding the gravel, the locket burning in her pocket. She reached Rose Cottage, locking the door, her breath ragged. The locket's note named Clara Dane, but the man's words, the wrong man, pointed to a deeper conspiracy. She opened the journal, desperate for clarity. A final entry, hidden in the back cover, was written in Miss Marple's sharp hand. "The locket names the pawn, but the king hides in plain sight. Look to the one who gained everything." Clara's eyes widened. Lillian, the heiress who inherited all, whose locket lied, who dismissed the locket's importance. Had Lillian orchestrated Clara Dane's death, using Philip as a scapegoat? The man with the knife, was he her agent, still protecting her secret? Clara needed to confront Lillian again, but the hum followed her, now a whisper. Clara, not her name, but Clara Dane's, echoing from the manor. A thud hit the doorstep. Another rose, its petals blackening with a note. "The locket won't save you." She knows. Clara's heart stopped. Lillian was alive and the killer was hers, closer than ever, their roses a promise of her own grave. Chapter 13. The Final Confrontation. Clara's heart raced as she gripped the locket, its clover clasp warm in her palm. The note inside, "I am not Eleanor Grayson. I am Clara Dane." A burning accusation. The blackening rose and its note, "The locket won't save you. She knows," lay on Rose Cottage's table alongside the journal. Tom Wither's confession, the brass hinge, the clover clasp, and the torn photograph. Miss Marple's final entry. "The king hides in plain sight. Look to the one who gained everything." Pointed to Lillian Grayson, the heiress whose lies had woven the manor's secrets. Clara knew she had to confront her, but the man with the knife, still out there, made every step a gamble. The drive to Upper Cranley's nursing home was tense, the journal open on the passenger seat to a chilling line. The manor's last secret is its master, and she wears a locket of lies. Clara's mind churned. Lillian had inherited Willow Manor, dismissed the locket's importance, and warned her to stop. Had she hired Clara Dane to impersonate Eleanor, then silenced her to hide Philip's fraud? And the man with the knife, her agent or another player in the Graysons' ruin? At the nursing home, the conservatory was dim, rain pattering against the glass. Lillian sat in her wicker chair, her silver hair glinting, her clover locket gleaming at her throat. Her eyes narrowed as Clara entered, the locket in her hand, its gold catching the light. "You've been busy, Miss Henshaw," Lillian said, her voice smooth but edged. "I told you to leave it alone. What's that in your hand?" Clara held up the locket, her voice steady despite her fear. "This belonged to Clara Dane, the woman you hired to pose as Eleanor. Her note says Philip killed her to hide his fraud, but Jane Marple knew better. You gained everything. Willow, Manor, the Grayson fortune. You orchestrated it all, didn't you?" Lillian's fingers tightened on her own locket, her smile cold. "You're clever, like Jane, too clever. Yes, I hired Clara Dane. Eleanor, my real sister, ran off months before, eloped with a nobody, shaming the family. Philip was bleeding, us dry with his debts, so I paid Clara to play Eleanor, to keep up appearances until I could secure the estate. She was perfect, same build, same fire. But she found a letter in Father's desk, proving Philip forged our inheritance. She wanted to expose him." Clara's pulse quickened. "So you killed her. You swapped lockets to hide the note, let Philip take the blame, and buried the truth." Lillian laughed, a brittle sound. "Killed her? No, dear. Philip was a fool, but he didn't push her. Clara was drunk on laudanum, Carver's doing, to keep her docile. She argued with someone in the tower, not me. I heard the scream, found her below, the locket gone. I wore hers to keep up the charade, but I didn't. Kill her! Then who did? Clara demanded, stepping closer. Tom saw a man with a knife. Sarah heard a man's voice. Your locket lies, Lillian, just like Jane wrote. Lillian's face paled, her hand trembling on her locket. You don't understand, she whispered. The man wasn't a man. It was Eleanor, my sister disguised as a man. She came back that night, furious, demanding her share. Clara confronted her with the letter, and Eleanor, she snapped. She pushed Clara, took the locket, and fled. I covered it up to protect. Her, not me. Clara's breath caught. Eleanor? The real Eleanor, alive and disguised? The journal's words, the man in the tower is not what he seems, clicked into place. But Lillian's story felt incomplete. If Eleanor killed Clara, why the roses? Why threaten me now? Lillian's eyes darted to the window, her voice dropping. Because she's still out there. Eleanor never forgave me for taking the manor. She's been watching, leaving roses, sending her man, the one with the knife. He's her lover, the one she eloped with. They want the locket's note to prove I framed Philip. A creak came from the conservatory door, and Clara spun, her heart leaping. The man from the rosebed stood there, scarf gone, his face weathered, but fierce, a knife in his hand. Beside him was a woman, her eyes blazing with Eleanor Grayson's fire, aged but unmistakable from the torn photograph. Give me the locket, Clara, the woman said, her voice low. It's mine, and so is the truth. Clara backed against the glass, the locket burning in her hand. Eleanor, she said, her voice steady. "You killed Clara Dane. The note names Philip, but Tom saw you." Eleanor's face twisted. "Clara was a thief, stealing my name, my life. I took what was mine. Lillian let me rot, took everything. Now hand it over, or he'll cut you down." Lillian stood, her locket falling, open, revealing a tiny key, clover-shaped, useless no more. "Enough, Eleanor," she said, her voice breaking. "I protected you, lied for you. Let her go." The man lunged, but Clara threw the locket at Eleanor, who caught it, startled. Clara bolted for the door, shouting for the nurse. Chaos erupted. Eleanor's lover tackled Lillian, the knife flashing, but nurses and security flooded in, restraining them. Clara clutched the journal, Miss Marple's words her anchor. The king hides in plain sight. Lillian was no king, only a pawn in Eleanor's revenge. Later, at the police station, Clara gave her evidence. The locket, the note, the journal. Eleanor confessed, her lover silent beside her. Clara Dane's death was her doing, not Philip's or Lillian's. The real Eleanor had returned disguised to reclaim her legacy, killing to keep her secret. Lillian's lies had shielded her sister, but the roses, Eleanor's signature, betrayed her. Back at Rose Cottage, Clara sat with the journal, its pages quiet now. The hum was gone, the roses silent. Miss Marple's final note, faint but clear, closed the case. The manor's secrets bloom like roses, but truth cuts deeper than thorns. Clara smiled, weary but whole. The locket's truth was free, and St. Mary Mead could rest, at least until the next secret bloomed. Epilogue. The journal's last whisper. The autumn sun cast a soft glow over St. Mary Mead, its warmth a quiet balm after the storm of secrets that had shaken Rose Cottage. Clara sat in the parlour, Miss Marple's journal open before her, its pages worn, but no longer whispering threats. The locket, now in police custody, had told its truth. Clara Dane, not Eleanor Grayson, had died in the tower, killed by the real Eleanor to reclaim her stolen life. Lillian's confession, Eleanor's arrest, and the lover's silence had closed the case. But the roses, those blood-red warnings, still lingered in Clara's dreams. She traced the journal's final entry. Miss Marple's words, a gentle echo. The manor's secrets bloom like roses, but truth cuts deeper than thorns. Clara smiled, weary but proud. She'd followed the journal's clues, the cipher, the locket, the grave, and unravelled a 70-year-old lie. The brass hinge, Tom Wither's note, the clover clasp, and the torn photograph sat in a box, relics of a truth that had nearly cost her life. The hum, that eerie murmur from the manor and Tom's grave, had faded, but its memory sent a shiver down her spine. The village was quiet now, its rhythms restored. Reverend Hale had offered a prayer for Clara Dane, her name finally spoken after decades of silence. Sarah Ellis sent a letter, her words shaky but grateful. "You gave her justice, Miss Henshaw. I can sleep now." Dr. Carver, shaken by the truth, had retreated into silence, his clover clasp confiscated as evidence. Lillian, frail but unbowed, awaited trial for her lies. Her locket, the key to the manor's vault, revealed as a hollow gesture to a sister she'd both betrayed. and protected. Clara closed the journal. Its way to comfort. Miss Marple's genius wasn't just in her words, but in her trust that someone, someday, would listen. Clara had listened, and St. Mary Mead was safer for it. She stood, intending to shelve the journal, when a faint scent stopped her. Roses, sharp and sweet, drifting through the open window. Her heart skipped, but the garden was empty, the path clear of blooms or notes. Yet, as she turned, a shadow flickered in the parlour mirror, brief and formless, like a figure just out of sight. Clara froze, her breath catching. The hum returned, soft as a sigh, whispering a name. Not Clara Dane's, not Eleanor's, but her own. Clara. She spun, but the room was still, the journal silent on the table. She laughed, shaky, blaming her nerves. The manor's secrets were buried, its killer caught. But as she locked the cottage that night, a single rose petal lay on the doorstep, pale as moonlight, with no note, no threat, just a reminder. St. Mary Mead held more stories, and Miss Marple's journal might not be done with her. Clara smiled, unafraid. If another secret bloomed, she'd be ready, with the journal as her guide and the manor's whispers as her map. For now, she'd rest, but the roses would wait, and so would the truth.